Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I'm your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Quick reminder, we now have memberships here on the YouTube channel. You can click that join button below and join for as little as $3 a month. It's a great way to support me and the show here, and it allows you to have early access to all of these podcasts and videos. So anything you can do is more than appreciated, and just having you here watching goes a long way as well. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button below if you haven't already. And if you're out there in podcast land, be sure to hit that follow button. It really does help the show and the channel grow. All right, guys, today we're talking part 2 of CFI endorsements. Last week we talked about the kind of basic scenario for a standard private pilot who comes to you wanting to learn to fly and what it would kind of look like zero to hero. Today we're talking about a little bit more of what I consider to be an advanced scenario where someone is coming to you who's already a pilot. And the scenario that I typically give to my CFI candidates involves a helicopter flight instructor. And they come to you saying, hey, I'm a helicopter CFI and I have never flown an airplane in my life, but I want to learn how to fly an airplane and I want to ultimately add my airplane single engine land rating to, or technically the airplane single engine rating to my flight instructor certificate. So what's this person's training going to look like? And even more complex, what type of experience requirements is this person going to have to meet to ultimately be able to add on this rating to their flight instructor certificate? And how is their training going to look? Along with, of course, what endorsements you're going to be giving them from day one to the last day of their, before their check ride. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, for the purposes of this scenario, and being that we are going to be talking experience requirements, we're going to assume, and this is really unrealistic, but we're going to assume for simplicity's sake that this particular person has only the minimum amount of experience required to get their flight instructor helicopter certificate. Okay, so we're going to be approaching it from that standpoint. And so, of course, in order to get their flight or their airplane single engine rating onto their flight instructor certificate, they're first going to have to meet the eligibility requirements, which involves having an airplane single engine rating on their commercial pilot certificate. So let's take a look here, and we're going to see what this training might look like, how we're going to structure it to make it as efficient as possible for our student and hopefully as quick as possible. Okay, so once again, we are going to be assuming he has just the minimum amount of experience required to get his flight instructor helicopter certificate. And so if we're looking, there's no experience requirements per se for the flight instructor certificate. So really what we're looking at is the commercial pilot certificate, 61-129 experience requirements for the rotorcraft certificate or category with the helicopter class rating. Let's go ahead and pull that up. Okay, and we see here that for a helicopter rating, it says, this is 61-129 Charlie, except as provided in paragraph I, blah, 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 a person who applies for a commercial pilot certificate with a rotorcraft category and helicopter class rating must log at least 150 hours as a pilot. That consists of at least 100 hours in powered aircraft, of which 50 hours must be in helicopters. And again, we are assuming that all these hours have been in helicopters for this particular pilot. So that's easy. 100 hours of piloting command time, which includes at least 35 hours in helicopters and 10 hours in cross-country flight in helicopters. 20 hours of training on the areas of operation listed in 61-127 Bravo 3, and within that 20 hours of training, they need to have done at least 5 hours on the control and maneuvering of a helicopter solely by reference to instruments. Now, there's a little bit of a difference here between the instrument requirements for a helicopter versus what's required for an airplane. In a helicopter, it actually reads at the end here, the last sentence, this aeronautical experience may be performed in an aircraft, full flight simulator, flight training device, or an aviation training device. So, potentially, they might not have any actual instrument training or flight by reference to instruments in an actual helicopter, because potentially they could have done this all in essentially a simulator. Okay, so we're going to remember that and we'll come back to it. Next, it talks about needing a 2-hour cross-country flight, a training. Remember, this is a training flight. 2-hour cross-country in daytime conditions, and 1 2-hour cross-country in nighttime conditions. Then finally, you need 3 hours in the helicopter in preparation for the check ride. And you need 10 hours of solo time in a helicopter, which also includes 1 long cross-country and also 5 hours of nighttime flight in VFR conditions with the 10 takeoffs and landings. Okay, that's all the same as it is in an airplane. All right, so to summarize, we're going to say this pilot needing only 150 hours of total pilot time in order to qualify for their commercial pilot certificate with a helicopter. Let's assume that they had 2 more hours for the actual commercial pilot check ride. And let's assume they had another 2 hours for the flight instructor check ride. So we're going to say this pilot has 154 hours of total time. And of that, we're going to call PIC time 104 hours. Remember, 100 is kind of the minimum they need to qualify, plus those 4 extra hours for check rides. Cross-country PIC time, we'll say he has 10 hours. And then the instrument time, 5 hours, which potentially could have been done in a simulator. So we'll come back to that. So that's what he has. Now let's look at what he's going to need to add on his airplane single engine land rating to his commercial pilot certificate. Because again, that's the prerequisite we're trying to meet in order to qualify him to add his airplane single engine rating onto his flight instructor certificate. All right, so back to 61-129. For an airplane single engine rating, we need 250 hours of total pilot time. So we're 100 hours short roughly with this particular pilot. 100 hours in a powered aircraft, which he has in helicopters. However, 50 of which must be in airplanes. So he's going to need at least, we're at 154, so at least 96 more hours of just piloting time. But at least 50 of those are going to need to be in airplanes. We have 100 hours of piloting command flight time. Now, he has that, but it says it needs to include at least 50 hours in airplanes. So not only do we need the 96 hours of total time to get us to that 250, but we need to have at least 50 hours of pilot and command time in airplanes. So in addition to just having the 50 hours in airplanes in general, we're going to need 50 hours of pilot and command time. Then we have 50 hours of cross-country flight, of which at least 10 hours needs to be in airplanes. Okay, so we can probably assume that 10 hours is going to be taken care of somewhere in that 50 that they're going to be getting at minimum. Next, we got 20 hours of training. Okay, based on the listed operations in 61-127 Bravo 1. This includes 10 hours of instrument training. Okay, now here, this is 10 hours of instrument training using a view-limiting device, including attitude instrument flying, partial panel skills, recovery from unusual attitudes, and intercepting and tracking navigational systems. It says 5 hours of the 10 hours required on the instrument training must be in a single engine airplane. So they need 10 hours. They've already done at least 5. Now that 5 could have been done in a sim or in a helicopter. Either way, only 5 of these 10 hours need to be done in an actual single engine airplane. So regardless of whether this person has the 5 hours previously in a helicopter or a sim, at minimum, they're going to need 5 hours in the airplane. Going on, it says 10 hours of training in the complex turbine-powered or technically advanced airplane. Okay, and this can, of course, depending on what type of plane they're training in, technologically advanced aircraft are quite common these days, and that could just kind of be the standard plane he's training in. So that would be helpful there, but he has to find some combination of those. And, of course, he'll need the 2-hour cross-country in daytime conditions, and the 2-hour cross-country in nighttime conditions with a minimum straight line distance of 100 miles from the point of departure, okay? He'll also need the 10 hours of solo time in a single-engine airplane, which includes a long cross-country of at least 250 nautical miles away from the point of departure, 300 nautical miles total. And then he'll need the 5 hours of nighttime VFR flight in the single-engine airplane with the 10 takeoffs and landings, just like he had to do for his helicopter. All right, so we've kind of identified what types of deficits he has in his current experience and what he's going to need to make up. Now, the question is, can he go straight to commercial with his airplane single-engine land? Or does he have to start with private? Well, he's already got his commercial pilot certificate with the rotorcraft helicopter rating. So potentially he could just add on this airplane single-engine land rating to his commercial pilot certificate without ever getting his private. But then the question becomes, well, is there any advantage to him getting his private first? What are the advantages and disadvantages of one route versus the other? Well, we know that this particular pilot is going to need to build a good amount of PIC time in an airplane, at least 50 hours worth, right? And this pilot can't do that for an airplane or for an aircraft that they're not properly rated in. So initially, unless they're solo, they can't log PIC time. Now, of course, once you get this pilot soloing the aircraft, then all the flight time they do solo is going to be PIC. But while they're doing their initial training with you as their instructor, none of that can be logged as PIC. So what would be an advantage to possibly getting a private pilot certificate first over a commercial pilot add-on? We know that the requirements for a private pilot certificate are a little less than the commercial pilot requirements. If we go to our 61109, we can see the requirements here. It states that for a single-engine airplane rating for a private pilot, you only need 40 hours of flight time. Well, this pilot's already got that. And we need at least 20 hours of flight training, so that's probably going to happen no matter what. 10 hours of solo flight. It says we need 3 hours of cross-country training in a single-engine airplane. That's easy enough to get done within that 20 hours of instruction. It says we need to have some solo cross-country time, which is fine. But ultimately, there's, looking at all these requirements, there's a lot less to meet initially to qualify for this add-on than the commercial side of things. So what would be the advantage of that? Well, obviously, like we said, this pilot's going to have to do a good amount of time building to get to that 250 hours and get that PIC time, that 50 hours of PIC in airplanes. If he's on a budget, he may want to be taking some friends and family with him and split those costs, or maybe go out with a safety pilot or something like that to make it a little bit cheaper. And he couldn't do that if he's just having to do solo flights to gain PIC time because he's not properly rated for that aircraft category and class. So if budget or, if money was an issue, they may consider to do this private add-on first. Then they can go fly around, build the experience and the time while splitting expenses with friends and family before doing the commercial add-on. So that would be one potential upside. Now, of course, what are the downsides? Well, that's going to involve an extra check ride. And who knows? I mean, that check ride probably going to be at least $900, $1,000, whatever. Maybe less, but ultimately it's going to be an extra expense for that check ride. And maybe that expense cancels out any benefit from time building. Who knows? But that's something to consider. All right. So regardless of whether this pilot chooses to do their private add-on first or their commercial add-on, at some point you're going to need to endorse them to solo that aircraft. Now, are we going to be giving them the standard solo endorsements that we give to student pilots? Well, the answer would be no, because this pilot is not a student pilot. They hold a full-fledged commercial pilot certificate, and in fact, they have their flight instructor certificate as well. So the thing we need to understand here is that we never can give student pilot endorsements to a pilot who's not a student pilot, which actually makes our lives a lot easier. But then the question does become, which endorsement do they need to get in order to take this airplane out solo? Well, let's take a look here. If we look in part 6131, we see that in 6131 Delta, it reads as follows. Aircraft category, class, and type ratings. Limitations on operating an aircraft as the pilot in command. It says, to serve as the pilot in command of an aircraft, a person must, 1, hold the appropriate category, class, and type rating, if a type rating is required, for the aircraft to be flown. Pretty straightforward. We all know that, right? You have to have the appropriate category and class on your pilot certificate to act as pilot in command. Or, it says, number 2, have received training required by this part that is appropriate to the pilot certification level, aircraft category, class, and type rating, if the type rating is required, for the aircraft to be flown, and have received an endorsement for solo flight in that aircraft from an authorized instructor. Okay, so this is an or. This is not an and, right? You can act as PIC of any aircraft you receive proper training in and receive a proper endorsement to do so. Now, the key here is the last sentence. It says, and have received an endorsement for solo flight in that aircraft. This is not good for taking passengers, okay? Because without actually holding the proper category and class on your pilot certificate, you cannot take passengers as pilot in command, but you can operate it solo. So which endorsement are we going to be giving this pilot to satisfy this regulation? Well, if we go back to our 6165 Juliet, we can see under Alpha 72, it says to act as PIC of an aircraft in solo operations when the pilot does not hold an appropriate category or class rating. And it quotes the regulation 6131 Delta 2. It states that I certify that Joe Schmo pilot has received the training as required by 6131 Delta 2 to serve as a pilot in command in a specific category and class of aircraft. I have determined that they are prepared to solo that make and model of aircraft. And then you can put any limitations you want on it. So that's it. That's the only endorsement that you need to give this pilot in order to solo them, essentially. Because they are not a student pilot, they do not need special endorsements to go land at other airports. They don't need special endorsements for cross countries or anything else. They can go in any airspace, any airport, any distance. Of course, all in line with whatever limitations you put on this endorsement. But they already are a full-fledged pilot. They are not a student pilot, and they are essentially flying on their certificate, but still under your authority for this particular aircraft, okay? So that makes it really easy when it comes to the endorsement for soloing this pilot. And from there, Again, based on whatever limitations you place on this endorsement, they can go fly it solo and build that PIC time that they're going to need. So short of that solo endorsement, we wouldn't have to give them any other endorsements until it comes time for their check ride, whether it be their private add-on or their commercial, whatever they decide to do first. And it would just be the standard ones that we discuss. Specifically, if we're looking at our commercial pilot endorsements, this is Alpha 34. Alpha 34 talks about the aeronautical knowledge test. Now, here's a question. Do they need to take an aeronautical knowledge test? And the answer to that is no, because they're already certificated for rotorcraft and their helicopters as a commercial pilot. So there's no additional knowledge test written. So this pilot won't need to take another knowledge exam and therefore won't need to go over any deficiencies on that knowledge exam. But they will still need their A1 endorsement, their prerequisites for the practical test, saying that they've logged the appropriate training time and all of that. So Alpha 1, and then the one that just says they are qualified for the commercial pilot airplane single engine land practical test. Hey everybody, Editor Sam here from the future. I need to make a quick clarification because I realize I didn't specify that the endorsement we're going to give to qualify them for the practical test in this case is not the normal commercial pilot endorsement. It's actually going to be A74 from our 6165 advisory circular. This is the one that says additional aircraft category or class other than ATP. And it reads that I certify that Joe Schmo pilot, grade of pilot certificate, so in this case, commercial pilot certificate, with their certificate number, has received the required training for an additional aircraft category. I have determined that he is prepared for the name of the practical test, so in this case, the commercial pilot airplane single engine land practical test. Hope that helps. Back to me in the past. All right, guys, so now they've got their commercial pilot add-on. Okay, let's say they've got their commercial pilot add-on for their airplane single engine land. Can they go and just take their flight instructor add-on check ride now? Well, we know that, of course, for any flight instructor rating, you need at least 15 hours of PIC time in the category class of aircraft, which this pilot has because they've gained 50 hours of PIC at least. But there's one more thing missing. Let's go back and take a look here. Now, if we pull up our 61-183, which talks about our flight instructor eligibility requirements, it talks about the fact you need to be 18 years old and all this stuff. It says that you need to be able to read, speak, and write the English language. And it says that you need to hold a commercial pilot certificate, of course, or an airline transport pilot certificate with the appropriate aircraft category and class rating. And then also an instrument rating. If you are applying for certificate, a flight instructor certificate with an airplane single engine land category class rating, a flight instructor certificate with an airplane multi-engine class rating, a flight instructor certificate with a powered lift rating, or a flight instructor certificate with an instrument rating. Does it say anything in there about needing an instrument rating for a flight instructor certificate with a rotorcraft helicopter rating? I don't think so. And remember, with our scenario here, we said that this pilot only has the minimum amount of experience required to get his helicopter flight instructor certificate. So this person does not, in our scenario, have an instrument rating. We kind of skipped over that. So we got to get this guy's instrument rating first, which means, he did his extra 5 hours of flight by reference to instrument at minimum for his commercial add-on. But that's only at minimum 10 hours of instrument time that he has. He needs to go out and build 30 more hours of instrument time minimum. and make sure he has at least 15 hours of training with a CFII, of which, if you are not a CFII yet, you could not be the one giving him that training. Okay, and so these are things that these nuances that can be easy to slip through the cracks if we're not aware of the requirements and ultimately of what are the students who come to us, what their qualifications actually are. So this is just one example of why it's extremely important when somebody comes to you, particularly someone who's kind of an experienced pilot or has some experience previously, that we do a thorough logbook audit to know exactly what experience they already have and what additional experience they're going to need to qualify for whatever certificate or rating they are pursuing. So we're going to have to go through his instrument training with him. We're going to get him the rest of his instrument time, his instrument training, which includes, of course, the long instrument cross country, 250 miles with landings or approaches at each airport. And then he has to go take his instrument check ride, which, of course, will give him the proper endorsements for that. And then finally, when all that is done, he is now qualified for his flight instructor add-on, and he can go and take that whenever you feel that he is proficient enough to do so. Okay, there are no more experience requirements at this point that this pilot's going to need to meet in order to qualify for their flight instructor add-on. All right, everybody. Editor Sam here from the future one more time. I tell you what, I've never had to make so many clarifications coming back to a podcast before, but I forgot one other thing, and that is the fact that this particular helicopter flight instructor would still need his spin training endorsement because he never got spin training before. It's not required to be a helicopter instructor. You only need it if you're going to be an airplane or glider instructor. So he would need to get that spin training, and he would need that spin training endorsement from 61-183. Hope that helps. But I hope this is illustrated for you guys how complex some of this stuff can get. A lot of these people, and this sounds like maybe an uncommon scenario, which it is, but it is not unheard of. And in fact, I've seen a couple people in this exact scenario. So you need to make sure, because when these people come to you, they're going to be looking to you to be able to tell them what's needed. Tell me how to get, I'm here. I want to get there. I want to get from point A to B or from point B to C. Tell me what I need to do that. And you need to be the authority on that. So proper auditing of logbooks, proper understanding of these regulations, and then, of course, proper understanding of your students' needs and their, timeline and their budget, and all this can determine how you structure their training ultimately and what's going to make the most sense for them. All right, guys. Well, I hope that's been helpful for you. If it has, be sure to share it with someone else that you think would find it helpful. Don't forget to hit that like and the subscribe button right down below if you're here on YouTube. Follow the show if you're out there in podcast land. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.